Deep Dive Film School makes no claim of ownership of the film footage used in this episode. The film footage is owned entirely by the copyright holders. Also, we're going to spoil the hell out of this movie, so this is your warning. Welcome to Deep Dive Film School!
Oh, this week we're going to get into that one scene from Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho.
Let's dive in. All right, everybody, I am Adam Sherlock.
And I'm Adam Palcher.
And if you like what you see / hear, please like and subscribe. You can find us all the spaces and places that people find good media.
That's right.
We do the festivals and the 101s every other week. Scene review.
That's right.
This is one that we had a commenter not that long ago just sort of mention. I guess it was
We
when
did Rear Window, right?
I think it was when we were actually talking about Scream, and we were talking about Drew Barrymore, like this sort of association with that, her being on the poster and everything, and then in that first scene, like being dispatched so quickly.
Yes,
that got us to talking about Janet Leigh.
That's true.
That's how we started talking about this scene that we're doing this week, which is what scene?
The shower scene, the death scene in the shower with Mr. or Mrs. Bates.
That's right.
This is obviously an all-time scene. I think it's ranked on best scenes and history, film history. Like it's the one they show in film school.
And I think it's hard for us as moviegoers who grew up as kids in the 80s at the real sort of height of slasher moviedom to realize what a game changer retrospectively
Great point.
This scene was, right? Yeah. Is that watching it again, obviously we can talk about the actual shots, we can talk about the way that it was made and all these things, but to watch it again and thinking about like nothing like this. I mean, this is, if you think of who is it? Herschel Gordon Lewis, I believe, is the guy who made like Blood Feast, and like he's sort of known as like the grandfather of slasher films.
Okay.
But even Blood Feast, which I think was his first it's considered one of the very first slasher films ever, was still like a handful of years after this. I mean, this did change everything, right?
Absolutely. And I really tried to put myself in the theater in 1960 and seeing this for the first time with a room full of people who have no idea what's coming.
And who were not allowed out once the movie started.
That's right. He had a little like cutout of him saying, no.
Yeah, like when the movie begins, we may not. And at the same time, it was also, you can't come into the movie late, because he was like, what I don't want to have happen is have somebody show up halfway through the film, because the shower scene is almost at the halfway point of the movie. To come in later than that and sit down and go, where the fuck's Janet Leigh, right? So it was this very intense thing. Plus, I mean, what a marketing genius. He was like, really want, if the movie does well, I want the next cadre of people waiting to go in and see the movie have those doors open and see the people who just saw it coming out. And I was like, we didn't even, this is before blockbusters. The first blockbuster technically was Jaws, right? So like you didn't do this thing where you released all on opening day one thing, but he was already thinking about that, of spoilers, of all these ideas that we know so well today.
Well, and just forcing his audience to feel a certain way.
Yeah.
That's what he's the master at. Right? Like whether it is, there's so much great tension in this whole movie, but especially this scene. And I hadn't watched this movie in a while, and I'm like, I don't want to just turn on the scene, because it's not as effective as watching the movie building up to the scene.
Well, and we set up by a scene earlier with Norman Bates. And of course, there's this beautiful subtext with the painting, and I can't think of the name of it, but we'll put it up here, that he literally lifts up the peepholes under. The painting itself is a painting that has these men who are spying on women who are like bathing. And then he literally pulls it down, and then that's what he does. And it's this titillating tits and ass kind of thing that was really big. Obviously not being not being gratuitous and over the top about nudity, but rather doing this kind of titillating 1950s thing of like, nudge and wink, like, this is a thriller, but you're going to see a woman undress in it. Like, he's utilizing that Well, but what I'm saying is like he's utilizing that concept, so that's what we think that the shower scene is going to be, right?
Oh yeah, I mean,
When
just
we
the
start,
shower scene with Janet Leigh, and I'm like,
you
oh,
start off.
that.
I mean, listen, on the movie poster, the
The
original
least
movie
sexy
poster,
thing ever.
she's like in one of those 1950s, bullet boob
Yep.
brassieres.
He wears multiple.
Oh, but I'm saying the movie poster has her on it and it says a new kind of thriller for psycho, and you're like, oh, he's leaning into this thing that people are like, oh yeah, you're gonna see this movie and wonder, did Janet Leigh really take her top off?
Yeah.
And then
So that was a marketing thing. He was just like, "Oh, sex sells. I'm gonna put her on it," and then
I
kill
think
her
that's
halfway
what
through the movie.
people. Well, I think people thought the first part, but not the second part, right?
Yes.
I think people thought like, oh, when we get to this shower scene, again, we're just doing this titillating thing,
reveal.
which again is
I
like,
keep saying titillating, and
Hey,
it's
listen,
really challenging
If-
my 10-year-oldness.
but I guess the point I'm making is that it feels like it's one thing that might feel a little guttery and a little trashy for Hitchcock to do because he was known for kind of more highbrow stuff
Sure.
than that.
No,
And so when it switches over to the Norman Bates coming in with the knife, I think people are like, wait, what? I thought this was a
that's
sexy
what I said. The
scene.
least sexy thing ever.
Yeah. Or the most sexy
And
if you're
I don't
thinking
even really think we see much of anything. It's very subtle if we do.
No.
And the way that it's edited obviously is a huge part of this, and how quick, fast paced it is. And
But again, like the whole like
tension it
Freudian thing of the penetration of a knife, like,
Mm-hmm.
a stabbing being the most like sexually motivated kind of murder that exists. Like
Mm.
all of these like psychological aspects still make it into that thing.
Okay.
And so, but again, to think of a movie that came much later, but obviously also inspired by similar events. You think about Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah.
Same thing where it's like,
Well, it's Ed Gein. Both of them are Ed Gein.
right. But you have multiple scenes where the chainsaw doesn't actually do anything.
Yeah.
But you leave the audience with so much palpable terror that they're like, I saw that knife go into Janet Leigh's body. And you're like, you didn't.
Did you?
It never did.
In
right?
your head.
Yeah.
It's just like the Jaws.
It completely is.
It's the same thing. Yeah. This movie inspired, and just himself just inspired so many different ways to think and control your audience.
Yeah.
And even something like 39 Steps, which is made in the 30s,
Yeah.
is just as effective. This was his first horror movie, though.
Yeah.
Out of all of those.
And I think when you're really looking at, I mean, I would say the combination of this movie, the fact that they did, yeah, I mean, it's like a Ed Gein thing, and you're like, yeah, there's the mom part, and there's the mummified body, and like, there's
It's
stuff
ahead of its
that,
time, though, obviously.
but I think they still put on the poster like based upon true events or whatever. They did that
Sure.
same thing,
Okay.
and you just go, like, yeah, it's a horror film in the sense of like, it has horrifying, grotesque elements in it. But like on a whole other level, you're like,
At the time, very graphic, though.
yeah, like nothing had
It's a
had
brutal
happened
scene
like
still.
this before. Yeah, totally. I don't know. I just think it's really interesting to think about it. And also, right after this, on the heels of this, you had something like In Cold Blood. I believe it was right after this was the Truman Capote book.
Sure.
But again, there's this like loss of innocence thing happening there. And listen.
Oh, go ahead.
We shouldn't go any further without at least mentioning the documentary 7852. I don't know if you saw that.
I don't know what that is.
Oh, really? Oh, it's a whole documentary about this scene.
Really?
And it's based upon that came out in 2017, I believe. 78 pieces of film, 52 shots, I believe.
In this one scene?
In this one scene.
And where does that start? Is that one when we're in the bathroom and she just flushes the toilet and throws the letter down?
Yes, which also the very first film to actually show a toilet on film.
I saw that in my research. Yeah.
I know, which is like so funny. You're like, oh yeah, that's that. Like the the MPA is like, what do we do?
It's
There's a
weird.
toilet in this movie.
It's true. Like the show Andor on Disney Plus, which is by far the best Star Wars spin-off thing I've ever seen.
I've watched the first
It's
two
fucking
episodes. It's really good. Yeah.
But near the end of the season, they show a stormtrooper bathroom, and apparently it was like some big deal because out of the decades of Star Wars shit, they've never shown them being human.
Yeah, well, there's a whole bit in Clerks
So
that
kind of interesting.
there's a whole bit in the movie
true.
Clerks that they do talking about like, well, what does the waste management even look like on the Death Star, right?
Just goes in the
Perfect,
face.
Kevin Smith. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Anyways, but
back
yeah,
to Psycho.
yeah. Well, another. As long as we're doing little tidbits of things like that. Do you know the very first TV show that ever showed a bedroom where there weren't double beds? It was a single bed with a husband and wife laying in the same bed. Do you know what show it was?
Probably much later than we thought. It's not Dick Van Dyke because they did
Nope.
have separate beds.
It's the Munsters.
Oh, nice.
I know. Isn't that weird? Like the Munsters get the rare honor of being like husband and wife in one bed, right?
Love it.
Yeah.
Great.
Anyway, though, yeah, first time you ever saw a toilet on screen, again, like it makes you start realizing how long ago this actually was, right?
Yeah, it really is. So they're shooting this in the 50s.
Yep.
Speaking of 50s, part of the reason this makes it, in order to implicate the viewers as voyeurs, because this is, I mean, just being a movie fan is voyeuristic anyway, right?
Let alone the guy who made Rear Window.
Exactly. So instead of a 35 millimeter lens that they would normally use, he used a 50 millimeter lens.
Oh, wow.
And it gives the closest approximation to human vision, is what I was reading. And so
Interesting.
the close-ups that we see are actually very zoomed out.
Wow.
Because, or it appears zoomed out because it is
It's so
because
large.
it's such
Yeah.
a big frame and millimeter open there. Whoops, sorry about that. But the close-ups are more effective and seem even bigger on screen. So
Well, and then
it's another little thing that this
and then of course
scene
Hitchcock messes with the composition of shots, right? I mean, the classic one where the door opens and we just get the shadow of the door opening, even before we see the shadow of the outline of
the profile.
Bates.
Yeah.
Even before that, just playing with putting her down in this lower right-hand corner, that space makes you immediately go,
Yeah,
why does
it's a lot, but that's
even
part
before
of
anything happens, you're like, why does this look like this? Right? Like I'm looking into this void. Something's going to happen.
it does look
there.
different than everything else. There's like a noticeable, I watched this probably 5-6 times.
Yeah.
And there's a noticeable, like almost lighting change because the aperture is so much more open.
Yeah.
With like a distinct when she's in the shower and she is in the corner, and they do a good job of like not making it be about her boobs or something, right?
Right.
It's nothing like that at all.
Well, once we get to that point, but before that, it's all about that, right? I mean, it is about kind of waking up the viewer to be like, wow, so look at Janet Leigh in the shower. And it's part of the reason why they got a body double.
Yeah, that's right. She was a body double.
The who was a Playboy playmate at the time.
Really?
And I mean, it's really interesting because Janet Leigh in an interview said, well, Hitchcock wanted someone who was comfortable being nude because we had to do all these tests with the shower curtain. He was like, he said the main thing he didn't want it to look like is that the woman on the other side was wearing something. And he's like, so we weren't going to do 25 shots of different kinds of shower curtains with me actually like naked on the other side with a whole cast and crew on the other side. Like, so they needed somebody. And so this woman, like she would show up every day and they would get it just right, where it's like, you can see it, but you can't see it, right? Like they're not breaking any laws by having her on the other side of the shower curtain, but it looks very natural. And she did wear like the tiniest little moleskin covering up a crotch patch. But other than that was topless in those scenes. And you know, he cut around it. He got very strategic.
He plays with the framing.
Yep.
I mean, and he did it in very inventive ways where, it's not a sexy thing. Obviously, it's not supposed to be. I love that he teased that in the marketing, though. That's fucking.
Oh
genius.
yeah. Well, and I mean, if you think about it, I mean, it's the reason that the shower scene in Psycho is the reason why every girl that Jason Voorhees has killed, the hundreds of girls that he's killed over the 4 decades that those movies have been around, has to take their shirt off first.
Yeah.
Like that's the Psycho shower scene is responsible for why that is.
And we know how much Hitchcock loves his blonde beauties.
Yeah.
You know,
and putting them in peril. But then this is like even more subversive where it's like, no, this isn't going to be in peril. And then it turns out okay. And then there can be sexy time. She's going to die.
Yeah.
Right. And he said when he was originally asked, like, you know, the Robert Bloch original book of Psycho, in the book, the scene takes place It's actually more brutal. The woman in the book is
And Bates is like an older guy.
Yeah, and the woman's decapitated in that scene.
Oh shit.
But when asked like why do you want to make a movie out of this, he literally just said the shower scene. That was it. Full stop. Because I think he just knew, like, in the book, it also does this weird pivot of like, wait, we've been following this character the whole time. Now we're going to introduce a whole new cast of characters after our main heroine that we've followed for the half the
Full
book is
Metal
gone.
Jacket does the same thing.
Right. And it's like, I think to him in that era, he was just like, that's the scariest thing you could do is kill off the person that everything hinges to, right? Like, it's a really great idea, right? Like, it's unlike anything else.
Man, there's so much to talk about with this scene. The sound, you know, where they have this great score throughout. It's like awesome. Just watching it back and watching the whole movie as a whole and the build up and everything. But really, I think the creepiest part of it is that the shower just keeps going.
It's after the music cuts back out.
Yeah.
It's literally after the attack. Yeah.
Like that one.
It's after the attack, and then he leaves and the music winds down. And I totally agree.
Just the shower.
And like, as much as like, and listen, the acrobatics of the cutting and editing in that sequence,
So good.
incredible.
The
I mean,
drain and
well, and they're
to the eye transition,
and they're reversing sequences where they literally started with the knife against the belly
and then
pulled it out and then reversed that and sped it up, like all these amazing things. But once we get to that drain, the music has stopped. We just have the sound of the shower going. This
just went down, ripped off the thing,
and we pull out, and there's that single tear coming out of her eye, and takes her final breath. I was like, damn, that is still as haunting today. Like that, like the part before, it's great. It's obviously, with some of the things we've seen since, it's not going to be like, oh God, oh, is she going to be okay? Like, where I'm like, oh yeah, it's the shower scene from Psycho. But after that drain, that whole transition into the eye, the pull out, the sound of the shower, I'm like, fuck, it is still so creepy. Like, it's so well done.
It's similar to 2001, where they throw the bone in the air and it turns into the spaceship, right? Like,
you're like,
transition. Obviously, that's a transition in time.
Yeah.
With that, but like the way they did that with the pivoting camera around
if
her.
you think about it,
and go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, back then, what they had to do, apparently, I want to say they did that take of pulling out of the eye 24 times. Unfortunately. But that whole spinning on the eye,
it's fucking awesome.
That spinning on the eye and then pulling out, the whole beginning spinning in the eye was like a post-production thing where they were spinning a single frame
inside.
Yeah.
So they didn't do that with the camera?
No, they had to do it after. So they just sat on it and then spun on that single image and then had the moment where they stopped spinning, and then they're like, hey, now we pull out. But it was this whole trick that they basically had to invent. And you have to think, this whole sequence, basically the script for it, Hitchcock gives to Saul Bass, right?
That's right.
Graphic designer, and obviously did all the amazing titles for tons of Hitchcock films, as well as other things like The Shining. Like, I mean, he, very prolific artist. But he gives the script to Saul Bass and says, I need a beat by beat storyboard of this whole thing. And telling him, okay, now in the next spot, what does the knife look like from her perspective? So he draws that. And he's like, okay, now we're around the corner right after he's left, and she has to reach out for the shower curtain. What does that look like? And then he's sketching all of it, and then that's exactly what Hitchcock filmed.
Great.
So that whole storyboard was all done by Saul Bass.
That's so cool.
And then he went back and was just shot it, beat for beat.
For a scene like this, you kind of have to do that, especially if that's the reason he wants to make the movie.
Yeah.
He's going to make it that, be that specific. So funny little tangent here. I took family to Universal Studios probably 5-8 years ago, something like that. And we went to a special effects show that they had, and they were talking about stuntmen and all this stuff, and someone asked the question, does anyone know what they use for blood in the famous Psycho scene? And I was the only person who knew the answer.
Hershey's syrup with water in
No,
it.
it's not Hershey's, actually. It's oh my gosh, Bosco.
Oh, really?
Yeah. George's pin number.
Amazing.
I didn't know it's Bosco chocolate sauce. Anyways, but that's what and that's why he wanted to shoot it in black and white.
Right.
They used it for that. And also he thought if he shot this in color, it would be way more brutal than it already is.
And he was worried about, I mean, he was already pretty up against the wall with this thing because he had originally pitched the movie to
he bet on this movie.
Yeah, he pitched the movie to Paramount. They turned him down. They were like, no, we have no interest in making something
I'll take
messed up.
Give me a cut.
I want something like 60% like on ticket sales or some shit. And like, yeah, I mean, it was a windfall for him, unlike anything else he'd ever done. And he never really topped it. I mean, he got close a bunch of times, but I mean, yeah. And so what's weird is I think he filmed it with Paramount, but then it came out on, was it Warner Brothers? I think. But the whole crew was the same. Or that's it, Universal. Yeah. The whole crew was the same crew he had been using for the TV show, the Hitchcock Presents.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It was all the same people he'd been working with all this time, and they were all still on the Paramount payroll, and then Universal put the movie out because Paramount had no interest in going near something that lurid.
Yep.
And so it is really interesting, and like you have to think, like, the dude has his hand in all parts of this.
You have to just let him do what he wants. Like, why are you trying to control?
Dude, down to
silly.
They brought in a tray of different kinds of melons and were stabbing them with knives. And he's the one that was like, the cassava. And so that's the sound is like a cassava melon being stabbed with a knife. Those are the sounds that are in the Foley of this scene. And so it's like down to that level where he's like, no, this one's like, again, it's too lurid.
It needs to be more fleshy.
Well, or less fleshy, right? Because he's being very like, I want it to freak everybody out. I want it to be really distasteful, but I also want it to be one of my movies, right? Which is like, it's still going to be kind of classy, even though it has the most fucked up things you've ever seen in it.
Great. Yeah. Great movie, great scene. Like, seriously, classic. There's so much that you can learn by watching this scene.
Yep.
And and the more times you watch it, there's more details, if you love the craft of film, that get broken down and you're like, whoa, how did they do that? Whoa, this was the 60s?
Yeah.
Whoa. Like, just recognizing all of the things and the things that came after it. That's probably just as important, right?
Yeah, well, and I think that I mean, you think about...
People like feeling like that, especially if it's just for a moment.
So I don't know if this makes the movie feel, this is the last thing I'll say, I don't know if this makes the movie feel more dated that this is the first time this happened or so revolutionary that it did. But the dude basically invented the jump cut, right? Mm-hmm. And again, in that same way as we've mentioned before with The Shark is Broken, it was the limitation of what he thought that he could actually show that made him create the jump cut. And then the process of the jump cut, him and the editor going, actually, that feels more like a stab. Right? Than just seeing a knife come down on a person and then trying to hide it somehow, to instead be like, bring it down. And now all of a sudden we're at a jump cut of her hand grabbing a hold of the wall. Right.
Yeah.
And then we see the knife come down again, but
there's
this
really
time
not that much
her head
blood.
turns, right? There's very little until he's left and we see it going down the drain.
Yep.
But the idea that the jump cut itself, broke filmmaking rules at the time, and then B was this thing that upon watching it back, they're like, well, we did it to play it safe, but now that I'm watching it, that's way worse. It's way scarier. It's actually more violent to not show it because now we're just like, we're leaning into the audience's imagination, and it's way worse.
That's what it's about.
And he created that, right? Like, and you go, because of limitation, because of the era that it came out, like just... I love that. That's my favorite part about art is like seeing sometimes people are only working with the handful of tools that they can afford. Yeah. And that because of that, the mother is the or what is it? Necessity is the mother of invention, and it's like
Exactly.
that actually creates
Forced creativity.
these really interesting workarounds that are then become like the language that we use to tell stories. It's really cool.
Amazing scene.
Yes.
All-time scene. So glad we got to it on here.
Yes.
But yeah, next week we are going to begin our Wong Kar-wai Fest.
I'm so excited.
And we're going to do In the Mood for Love. If you have not seen this one, put it on the list.
Yes.
At the very least. So join us. Please like and subscribe on YouTube and Instagram. Hit that bell icon on YouTube. You could follow us on TikTok as well. But yeah, really appreciate everyone watching. We'll see you next week.
Bye, you guys.